There is nothing creepier than a place that's been abandoned, not only because quietness is unsettling as it is, but because of the inferred horror. Why was this place abandoned? What happened? And where did the people go? It's chilling to say the least. These are the 20 creepiest abandoned places around the world. Number 20. Dundas Castle. How about we begin on the more supernatural side of things? After all, there are plenty of people who believe in curses for one reason or another, and that's the perfect way to begin talking about the Dundas Castle in New York. Castles are something that people used to dream about having, as it was the ultimate status symbol once upon a time. Even now, they're used beautifully in fantasy epics to highlight the grandeur of certain kingdoms. If you're wondering why you've never seen this castle in New York, that would be because it's in the Catskills, and it's pretty well hidden. The other reason is that most people wouldn't dare to go near it because of the supposed curse that is rumored to fill the entire place. Or at least that's what you would expect, right? But sadly, it's a bit more low-key than that. The site of this castle was not actually meant to be a castle at all. It was originally a lodge and went through a few owners' hands until it went to Ralph Dundas, who began work on the castle in 1915. But that's where the irony begins. While he was the one who had the order to have it built, he died before it was completed. In 1922, a year after his death, his wife Josephine was committed to a sanitarium without ever having lived in the castle herself. Their only child, Muriel, had a series of bad events come down on her, all the way up until she was institutionalized as well. And after that, the family just kept passing around the land, and bad things followed every single time. Eventually, the family abandoned the place entirely, and that's when nature would take hold of it. That naturally gave rise to various stories about what really happened in that castle, whether it was a prison to some of the family, and whether their ghosts still remain within its halls somehow today. So what should have been the triumph for the family eventually turned into their doom, and I would be shocked if someone hadn't already made a horror film about its story. Before we go on, like this video, smash the subscribe button, and click the notification bell right now, or this centipede will crawl on your face when you're sleeping. Now it's time for the sweet topic. People have been forbidden from entering this place for 100 years, and the reason is chilling. This is the Soviet testing station in the Caspian Sea. The facility is 5,200 square feet and includes a library, basketball court, and hotel so that those who are working on weapons testing here could have a decent quality of life. Sometimes nicknamed the Russian Fort Bjord, experts used to develop naval weapons and torpedoes here. But it's been closed for an incredibly long time, left to rust and decay, but still stands tall. A chilling memorial to the horrors of war. These days, nobody is allowed to enter because there are genuine fears as to what might have been left behind. But who knows what might be waiting there, hidden away? As always, let us know your thoughts in the comments section down below using the hashtag #SweetTopic. Number 19. Craco, Italy. As noted in the intro, there are numerous reasons for people to stay away from certain abandoned places. In the context of Craco, Italy, that would be because of public safety, as the once proud city is not what it used to be. Craco would first be settled by the Greeks in the 6th century AD, though tombs dating to the 8th century BC would hint at an older incarnation. That wouldn't be too surprising, given the gaps in records and how various civilizations love to build things on top of other things. Waste not, want not, right? Much like various places in the world, the city of Craco grew and shrank over the decades. It got new buildings, upgrades, new people, the works. It was also alive during key parts of European history, which included the exodus to the west. However, what would lay it low would be a natural disaster. A series of earthquakes and landslides slowly doomed the place to become something that was uninhabitable. By the time that 1980 came around, the entire city was abandoned, and now a standing ruin is all that remains. And that doesn't mean that you can't go and visit it, because you absolutely can. You just need to be careful, as the place is falling apart due to it being exposed to nature without any hopes of repairs for about 40 years. But because of its striking look and its new form, you'll occasionally see the city being used for films in one form or another, one of which was The Passion of the Christ, so even in its abandonment, it still receives some fame. Number 18. Gulliver's Travels Park. And now for something a little bit different, because here's an example of something that someone thought was a good idea, but it turned out not to be that at all. You see, in Japan, they wanted to bring more people to their country, and through government money, they created the Gulliver's Travels Park, an amusement park that was based from the beloved book. The park opened in 1997 and typified the bridge to nowhere construction projects that Japan's government and banking sectors have championed within the 1990s. That may sound like a harsh thing to say, but when you consider some of the things that they built and the rather creepy aesthetic that it gave off, you can see why the park didn't even last for a decade. Then, when it would be closed down, the place got even creepier because the statues and other elements of the park simply lingered while no one was in it, making you wonder what else might be going on in the park. Number 17. Hotel del Salto. Now, the next place was the case of bad timing, bad location, and just plain bad luck. The Hotel del Salto was built near the Bogota River in Colombia, and it was a place that was meant to be one of the most exotic hotels in the area. And, to an extent, they did that correctly, as it was a nice place to go, so long as you didn't see any spirits. Yes, there were allegedly ghosts who walked the grounds, because the waterfall they were next to was a place that its native people used to jump off of in order to get away from conquistadors. But wait, there's more. The river itself eventually became contaminated, and that made people want to stay away from it even more. Now, I don't blame them for that. Fast forward to now, and the hotel stands as a museum, but it's one that you should still be very wary of if you visit. Number 16. The Floating Forest. You might have multiple ideas about what this entity would be, but I assure you, it's a bit more nuanced than you may expect. Homebush Bay is a suburb in Sydney, Australia that's known for its Olympic Park, historic shipwrecks, and diverse recreational activities, and has become a popular destination for sporting events, concerts, and family outings. However, it is also a place where ships go to die. And I mean that in the literal sense, as ships were sent to the bay to be disassembled and then have their parts sold off. In the case of the SS Airfield, that never took place, and it has a new look as a result. The old ship would be brought to the bay back in 1972 to be dismantled, but the operations eventually ceased, and the bay no longer served as a shipwreck yard. As a result, the airfield and others like it were simply taken over by nature, and thus the supposed floating forest was born, and you have to admit it's quite the striking sight. Number 15. Poveglia Island. As I'm going to show you throughout this list, sometimes the real-life history of a place can be much scarier and more horrifying than anything that a supernatural story could cook up. And if you don't believe me, you only have to take a look at the still, sealed-off place in Italy called Poveglia Island. This island first got its brush with infamy during the infamous Black Plague. Those who were infected with the illness were brought to the island to be quarantined, and the whole place was then sealed off as a no-go zone. That basically meant that if you were sent to the island, you were being sent there to die. And they did, and they had to bury the bodies on the island in droves in order to make room for the other victims who were coming in. Then, as if the place could not become any more haunted, a mental institution was placed on the island, and bad things began to happen there. It didn't help when another building was put on the island and more bad stuff occurred. People just sometimes don't really get the hint now, do they? Regardless though, the island was eventually abandoned, and despite plans to put things in there to replace the old, that never happened. And if you go there now, well, you can actually be arrested. Number 14. Bannerman Castle. Here's another castle that you can find in New York. More specifically, it's 50 miles above New York City, and it's a castle that has an explosive history. Bannerman Castle is a historic structure that's located on an island in the Hudson River, built by Frank Bannerman, a businessman and military surplus dealer in the early 20th century. Today, the castle ruins are a popular tourist attraction and a venue for cultural events and some performances, but throughout its history, it has suffered quite a few blows. Bannerman made all of his money thanks to the Civil War and the Spanish-American War, and he bought so many arms after the latter that he needed a place to put them all. So that's when he bought the nearby island and built a castle. You can see where it's going. While Bannerman himself died in 1918, his family just kept on living in the castle, and then in 1920, the powder house blew up. This explosion, triggered by 200 tons of shells and powder, damaged the castle's edifice, and eventually the family left, the castle caught on fire, and it remains in some kind of ruins to this day. Number 13. Isla de la Muñecas. How appropriate that I'm talking about this one at number 13 in the spot, because to many people, this one is the most haunted of places in the world. And the number 13, kinda goes along with bad luck and hauntings and stuff. I didn't write these words, I simply read them because they're put in front of me. The story of the island is just as famous as the island itself. The caretaker for the place once found a girl's body drowned in nearby waters. He felt that he was being haunted by her spirit that lingered there, so he found some dolls, mainly their heads, and then hung them up all over the place so that she would have something to play with and she would leave him the heck alone. Fast forward to some time later, and the caretaker died in the exact same spot where he found the girl's body years before, allegedly. That's not freaky at all, but to make matters worse, now people think that there are multiple spirits that visit the island, to the extent that if people do visit, they'll swear that the dolls' heads are moving and that their eyes are always watching them. Dolls can always be creepy in the right context, but this one simply takes the cake. Number 12. The Monsal Sea Forts. Wartime can lead to the construction of many things in the name of both protection, comfort, and aggression. In World War II, that also included the Monsal Sea Forts of England. They were built on the waters off the coast of the country and were there for a very basic reason. If the Germans did dare to send an attack, the forts would see it and then radio that an attack was imminent. It's basic, but it has worked many times over. These forts were located in the Thames and Mersey estuaries and were then decommissioned in the 1950s. Some of them remain standing today and have been repurposed for a lot of various reasons, and that's because people eventually saw the true potential and historical importance of these places and then helped to restore them in their own ways. Number 11. Whitley Court. Now we'll stay in England for a bit and talk about Whitley Court, which is in Worcestershire. Whitley Court was once one of the greatest houses in England, reaching its peak in the Victorian period, when it was the setting for extravagant parties and royal entertainments. As you can imagine, the place was designed to be lavish and luxurious in every way imaginable, and it succeeded as noted. But the good times couldn't last. Several things began to go wrong with the Whitley family. And by 1937, a fire near the servants' quarters would lead to the entire place being burned to a crisp. You can go visit it today, and that's where you'll see ruins of old-world luxury in many ways. It just goes to show you how things can be taken away quickly and then turned into a puff of smoke. Number 10. Dome Homes in Florida. Before 2022, you might have noticed certain domed homes off the coast of Florida by Cape Romano Island. You may have even wondered how they got there. Well, the answer was that a retired oil man by the name of Bob Lee had spent many years coming up with a unique housing project that would be a kind of vacation home for him. Clearly, he did not want to build a simple mansion. He wanted something that was unique and that was all his own. And so he made a model of the domed homes on his property in Tennessee and then began building them on stilts in the waters off the coast of Florida. He was a very hands-on man and had big ideas for what this vacation home could be, and even wanted it to be self-sustaining via solar power. After it was completed, he then lived in the home on and off, and when storms inevitably came through, the places were designed to help keep him safe. However, it was not meant to last, and him and his family had to leave because they simply couldn't live there anymore. That's where the final twist comes into play. Remember how I said that you could see the houses before 2022? Well, that's because Hurricane Ian came through and then submerged the homes, which, you know, any person with common sense would have figured out before even building them. Number 9. Miranda Castle. Much like certain other places on this list, Miranda Castle was meant to be a luxurious place for people to come and stay. The castle interior featured majestic arched hallways, lavish wooden staircases, and ballrooms, all the things that one would need for the old-world appeal of a get-together. This was a historic castle that was built in Belgium in the late 19th century and served as a summer home for a noble family, that is, until the catastrophic events of World War II. As the battle lines in World War II would expand, the castle would eventually be taken over by the Germans, who used it as a place to house their soldiers, and that's definitely not what they had in mind when it was built. Eventually, it became a kind of orphanage that had a really shady history, and the cost to maintain it became too high, and in the 1990s it was abandoned by everyone and then left to rot. Luxurious one day, and not so much the next. Number 8. Ross Island. Every nation, no matter how big or small it may be, has points in histories that everyone could look at and wonder how they were so cruel. For Great Britain, you need only to look at their colonialism and how they treated people on the places that they liberated in the name of the empire. A great example of this was Ross Island in India. The place was one of many taken by the British, and they used it to house political prisoners and convicts. Ross Island served as the administrative headquarters for the British in the Andaman Islands from 1858 until around 1941. Today, it may be a popular tourist destination that's known for its ruins, and that also includes the old British Commissioner's house, a church, and a swimming pool. And it also has several hiking trails and scenic viewpoints. However, in its more horrific days, it saw many of the convicts there being residents of India, the same place that it had taken the island from. They rose up to revolt against their British oppressors, and upon capture, were forced to do hard labor to clear the island of its trees so that they could build the British luxury homes for their captors. Now, eventually, the island would become abandoned, and nature has reclaimed much of what was lost. Number 7. Ghost Town of Bodie, California. While it's hard to see it in the moment, there are plenty of places throughout the world that were built up solely because of a rich resource that was featured there. And then after that resource became depleted, the area was simply abandoned. Thus the term ghost town was born, because only the spirits of those who died there would remain. In California, one such ghost town exists in Bodie. It would be in 1876 that miners would flock there after the discovery of rich deposits of gold and silver within the town. That would draw people to the area like moths to a flame, not knowing that eventually they would be the ones who would be burned. But unlike other ghost towns, the people of Bodie were not afraid to take part in depravity, so long as they were happy and had gold in their pockets. As you may have guessed, they lived it up for a few decades, but then in the 1940s everything went out the window. Because of its location, it was remarkably preserved, and now it stands as an attraction for people who come to the state. Number 6. Sanji. As we all should know, the UFO phenomenon has been a very marketable one for the world at large, not to mention a boom for pop culture as people wonder what else might be out there in the universe. In Taiwan, in the late 1970s, they had the idea to make the Sanji UFO homes. What was the point of these? Well, they were to be UFO-like houses that people could come and visit and live in for their vacations. And believe it or not, their main goal was to target US military officers who were coming there for shore leave, which was a clever idea if they had planned it right. However, due to a lack of funding, along with multiple fatal accidents that had occurred during construction, the project was forced to be abandoned. Today, the Sanji UFO homes are a popular destination for many urban explorers and photographers who are fascinated by their unique and eerie aesthetic, and serves as a popular attraction for visitors visitors who are interested in both architecture and sustainable living. Number 5. Kolmanskap. Now we'll head to a place that is a ghost town, one that is literally being swallowed up by the desert. But it wasn't always that way. In Namibia, in 1908, a railway was being built in the area, and one of the workers came across a shiny stone. That stone turned out to be a diamond, and even back then, diamonds were one of the most valuable gems that you could discover. Those diamonds were in such supply that they could be picked up right off the ground by bare hands, and soon the area became flooded with men who wanted to make their fortune. That's why places like this are called a boom town, because people raced in to try and make it big before things went bust. To their credit, the deposit of diamonds was so rich in fact that they were able to do their mining for many years. They were even able to expand the small town into something a lot more vibrant and fulfilling for those who wanted to have a real life there. Before World War I had come along, they had found over 2,000 pounds of diamonds in the town. That's a massive amount that would be hard to calculate the wealth of. So what happened to this place? Well, several things. First, the war would drop the price of diamonds, so they were basically mining worthless stones at one point. And then another town nearby had unearthed diamonds of a much larger size. By the time that 1956 came around, Kolmanskap had become a ghost town. Today, the area serves as a tourist attraction, mainly because the buildings are halfway filled with sand from the local desert and are slowly becoming swallowed up. Number 4. Fordlandia. This next one will not be something you might be expecting, because it's not your typical kind of abandoned place, even by the standards on this list. You see, during the days of the 1920s, before the Great Depression, the man, the myth, and the legend Henry Ford was trying to come up with ways to further streamline his car-making process and get things done in a more cheap way. He acted just like a businessman. The answer in his mind was in South America, and that's because there was rubber there that he could acquire legally and then get the locals to become his workers and ship that product back to the United States for relatively cheap. That's very much an example of, if you can't go to the mountain, bring the mountain to you. Ford had planned a corporate city called Fordlandia and surrounded it with every kind of imaginable luxury: swimming pools, a golf course, bungalows, and even a place for practicing national American dancing. All of these were supposed to be part of the corporate city itself. And if you look at it from a business standpoint, it does make sense. He would have gotten easy access to materials, some cheap labor, and would have had a leg up on his competition, which was something that Ford was always striving for. Now, it could have been his best idea. However, the town also had a strict set of rules that were imposed by its managers. Alcohol, women, tobacco, and even football were forbidden within the town, and that included inside of the workers' own homes. Eventually, people got tired of the restrictions and revolted against Ford's people. To that end, not a single thing of rubber was made from South America to the United States for his cars, and it remains one of his biggest failures ever. It also goes to show that just because you have a good idea and are willing to swing for the fences doesn't mean that it's always going to work out. Number 3. Pripyat, Ukraine. So far, I've shown you all kinds of reasons for places to be abandoned, but arguably none of them compare to what happened in Pripyat back in 1986. As you should know by now, that was the year when the Chernobyl nuclear disaster took place, and one of the greatest ironies of that event was that before it, Pripyat was a great place to live. It featured 15 primary schools, a large hospital, 25 stores, 10 gymnasiums, parks, cinemas, factories, a pool, and many more other things for a thriving community. When it was evacuated, it had over 49,000 people living there, and that amusement park, it was actually an award for the town due to how prosperous it had become. But one day in April of 1986, everything would change for that community because all of life was suddenly gone. Because when the reactors began to fail and radiation poured into the air, Pripyat was one of the many places that was in the zone that was needed to be cleared out. Imagine being part of that. You're living in your home happily, and then the next day, you're told you have to evacuate due to an incident that's going down at the power plant. To this day, it stands as a reminder of what happens when you take shortcuts and don't protect the people that live nearby. And if you take a look at what it's become, it's something out of a post-apocalyptic world. Funnily enough, there are numerous games that take place within Pripyat and uses its nuclear look and feel to deliver an interesting story and experience. And while that may seem cool, it shouldn't take away from the fact that tens of thousands of people had to leave behind everything because of a disaster, and the city will never, ever be the same. Number 2. Villa Epecuén. As I've shown you multiple times, the desire to bring tourism to an area is always a reason for people to build things big and small, such as with this villa in Argentina. It was a place that you could reach from Buenos Aires, and when it was up and running, could host 5,000 people. Not too crowded, yet not too barren. So what happened? Well, the dam broke, and that would cause waters around the village to rise, forcing the people to leave. Despite the disaster being dealt with eventually, the place was never rebuilt, and while you can still visit it today, you'll see very clearly the natural damage that the dam breaking did to it. Number 1. Huaqui Island. We all know that Mother Nature is going to reclaim the world eventually. It's only a matter of when and how. If you head to this island in China, you're going to see very fast how quickly things are going to and what they may look like. Because this is a place that was once a successful fishing village, and then it got so overpopulated that no one could make a living there. In only a few decades, the village was turned into an abandoned paradise, with green ivy swallowing every former home. It seems like something out of a fairy tale or even a fantasy novel, but it is true. This is what happens when no one is there to tend to the nature and its growth, and it will be the fate of everything humanity has ever made eventually. That's all from the realm of creepy places that you'd need to be really brave to enter. Which of them do you feel is the creepiest of the bunch, and are there any others that should have made this list? Be sure to let me know all about it in the comments section down below. Check out the other cool things that are showing up on the screen, and I'll see you next time. I love you.